a scheduled meeting of the San Diego Board into session. If anyone would like to speak on an item that's not on our agenda, there's public speaking cards back there on the back table. There's also a QR code if you can do it online. If you'd fill one of those cards out and give it to Chris, we will call you up to speak at the appropriate time. Kelly, do you, oops. Yeah, would you read the statement, please?
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Before we start today's public forum, I would like to share some instructions about how to participate and comment online using Zoom. Online participants that would like to comment during the public forum or during one of the board agenda items must register for and sign into the Zoom webinar via computer or phone. Information on how to register for the Zoom webinar is located on the San Diego Water Board meeting agenda webpage. Public comments will be accepted for each item after all presentations for the item are complete. If you are using Zoom on a computer or tablet, please use the raise hand button to indicate you wish to comment. If you are calling in to Zoom on a phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. There is a 3-minute time limit for each public commenter. However, the time could be extended at the chair's discretion. For those participating by Zoom, you will see a timer on the screen and will hear beeping when your time is up. Lastly, please state your name for the record before you speak, and please mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Chris, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Blair,
Present.
Ms. Cantu,
Present.
Dr. Olson,
Present.
and two is not here. Ms. Warren.
Here.
And Chair Strawn.
Here. At this time, we will enter our public forum. Any member of the public may address and ask questions of the board relating to a matter within the San Diego Water Board's jurisdiction, provided the matter is not on today's agenda. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to make their comments, both in person and on Zoom. Do we have any cards, Chris? Do we have anyone on Zoom? Moving right along. I would like, is there any discussion about the minutes from August 13th? We have 2 sets of minutes to approve today.
Mr. Chair, I do.
Go ahead.
I have been noticing that our minutes are becoming increasingly succinct. And so that's always something to strive for, I suppose. But I would really like to see if we changed our method so that when people testify before us, we capture whether or not they're telling us that they are in support of the measure, or if they are opposed to the measure, or if they are opposed unless amended, or whatever their position is. I understand sometimes it might be ambiguous, but I think we owe it to people who take the time out of their day to come and testify that we heard them and we understood what they said. And at the very minimum, that's what I would like to request. And with that codicil, I'll move both sets be approved. Second, I'll second.
Can we approve them both with one vote?
If I was only present for one of the meetings, how would you ask that I vote?
We should just do them separately then. If
Okay,
you,
sorry.
yeah, we're going to do 2 votes then.
Call for the 13th, please.
Ms. Blair,
Aye.
Ms. Cantu,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Ms. Warren,
Stan.
Chair Strawn.
Aye. And for the 27th,
The 27th. Ms. Blair,
Aye.
Ms. Cantu,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Ms. Warren,
Aye.
Chair Strawn.
aye. We normally go to our state board liaisons reports here, but Nicole Morgan cannot make it today. In her absence, I want to congratulate her on being approved by the Senate along with Betty and Celeste, I think both. No?
I'm only
Oh, you-
governor.
Oh, okay.
Have to still be approved.
Well, by the governor then. Okay. I'm sorry, I misread that message. At that, would any of my fellow board members like to make a comment on any other subject?
I have a question and it really could come during the executive report.
So with that, let's move right to the executive officer's reports. Mr. Gibson.
Good morning, Chair Strawn and members of the board. Before we get started on that, I do believe you have some honors to do today. I think now's a good time.
Whoops, there we go. This morning, we would like to congratulate Lisa Homna, Frank Melbourne, Erica Ryan, Paul Cicerelli, did I pronounce that correctly? Chera Clemente for earning Superior Accomplishment Awards for their monumental team efforts prosecuting a complex and important enforcement case. The complexity of the case presented new challenges for the team that were outside the scope of typical enforcement. By applying exceptional creativity, interagency coordination, teamwork, and a focus on the Water Board's mission, the team delivered an outstanding result that realized environmental benefits and a meaningful enforcement deterrent for dischargers and others. This case required the team to work with multiple agencies, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. EPA, the Department of Justice, to criminally prosecute an individual that committed forgery of Water Board documents. By meeting weekly for the course of nearly 2 years, staff from the Office of Enforcement and 3 separate programs within Region 9's, which is Stormwater 401, Water Quality Certification and Enforcement, navigated through the difficult decisions, identified and created solutions, and worked as a team to achieve meaningful environmental enforcement outcomes. Thank you all for your hard work. And we have certificates if you will meet me in the front here.
Here you go, Gary. There's one on your desk.
Just quickly want to say thank you whoever wrote the summary. That was very well done because I was going to cover some of those things. But, just a little bit of a focus that this was a very complex case. Lisa was our staff in the 401 unit that discovered that this site that she had already started work on, the on moving the case forward. There were some complex legal issues and then even logistic issues. And Paul dealt with all of it, including, as was said in the summary, we were coordinating with US EPA and also the US Army Corps of Engineers on this, which makes it much more difficult. But, and then Erica for the stormwater work that we have also an additional penalty for the construction stormwater violations. But fantastic teamwork and organization. I'm very proud to be a part of this team. And we don't do it alone. It takes team effort. So thank you all.
And it took a coordination to get EPA to actually get criminal charges filed against that consultant. So thank you very much for ensuring that the integrity of our permitting process is sustained.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Strawn. And then thank you again, staff, for that outstanding work. Not every day we get to ensure that a criminal conviction is ensured for an egregious violation like that. And we were able also to take action on the 401 certification retroactively with punitive mitigation measures and ensure that we establish a deterrent effective. Returning to our executive officers report, Chair Strawn, I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge Cole Rodriguez and Kaylee Popovich, who recently joined our staff, and welcome them again. Also, are they here? Please stand up and say hello. Thank you. And joining our agricultural waste discharge regulation team, they've already dived deep into the deep end of that pool by presenting very effectively and successfully on a presentation to the State Water Board's Blue Ribbon Panel on agricultural waste discharge requirements and regulations. We in San Diego are rather different than the rest of the state in terms of how agriculture is regulated and its importance to our community. And they were able to present our perspective to the Blue Ribbon Panel for their consideration and updating the regulations that we regulate discharges from ag on. So very welcoming, very appreciative and welcoming to them again for making that contribution right away. Are there any questions on the executive officer's report for this month? Dr. Olson, I believe you had one.
I do. I wanted to ask, we did hear about the spills over Labor Day, but I'm still unclear as to exactly what caused them and whether or not the progress toward treating 10 million with advanced primary is still on track for September 15th.
You're referring to the Tijuana River
Yes, I'm sorry.
transboundary flows.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to cover that in item number 3, but since we're here at the moment, I'll come back to that if necessary. After your action on August 27th, there was rain in Tijuana, monsoonal rains that increased the river flows to about 150 million gallons per hour, 150 million gallons per day per hour. So they were not able to operate PB-SILA, so they did shut it off. As soon as the flows had passed and were again back to within range of diversion, around 30 million gallons per day, they did turn PB-SILA back on. At that time, IBWC began trying to take in additional flows to the plant. They planned to ramp it up in 2 phases. The first 5 million gallon phase started, and then they realized they had a leak in their line for ferric chloride, which they're adding to the primary treatment system to improve its performance and coagulation. Took them about a day or 2 to fix that leak. As soon as they started it up again, they then found they, of course, had another leak in the polymer line this time. And so they now have fixed that as well. So they now have both of those lines fixed, and the plant is taking in about 30 million gallons per day, plus or minus about 1 million gallons. And they are planning to ramp it up now to another 5 million gallons. In the meantime, in Tijuana, they've had a major water line break for a change, freshwater line, about 40 million gallons per day yesterday. That spiked flows up in the river a little bit. This is an ongoing challenge in Tijuana for both water and wastewater infrastructure. We're much more familiar with the wastewater issues there, and they are several still. Even though PB-SILA is operating and they're diverting about 30 million gallons per day, additional flows have been introduced to the river in the last month of about 4 million gallons per day, as CESP is working on a pipeline replacement for Colecta Oriente. They're discharging about 4 million gallons of raw wastewater to the river, rather than bypassing it. So even as we have tried to move the mark and increase diversions for PB-CELA and take in more wastewater into the treatment plant, realizing a net reduction down to zero is always going to be a challenge. And we are relying on the nation-to-nation communications and diplomacy, and also on the Minute 328 funding to come through from Mexico as well as the US and finish the projects that will hopefully end these discharges. For example, the River Gates project has been stalled for several years. It's not for gates on the river, it's for collection system connection of businesses and homes that are currently not connected to sewer. They're connected to storm drains to connect them to sewer so that they discharge to the sewer lines rather than the storm drains. So there is still a lot of work yet to be done, but your work on the cease and desist order is valuable. It has given EPA and IBWC leverage, and it is resulting in a net increase of sewage treatment at the treatment plant. And so far, they're able to maintain compliance with their effluent limits. Our staff were down there yesterday, and we'll be meeting with them regularly and overseeing their results as quickly as they come in to make sure that they're in compliance with their permit and the cease and desist order.
Is there, do we know if there's been communication from the International Commission up to the national EPA, et cetera, about the current problems that are still existing? And about, I guess it's road, is it road construction that is the problem with the pipe, or it's just getting things connected that is the problem?
Well, the federal highway problem has resulted in sediment issues, which have affected both the treatment plant and the river valley and the canyon collectors. It was the reason we had the break on PB1A and 1B that caused them to fail in 2022. I understand that the commissioner is in regular contact with US EPA. Our staff are meeting on a weekly basis, all three agencies, and we're working with them on the design and upgrade of the treatment plant as well. Unfortunately, I do understand that Administrator Cook has already resigned from Region 9 administration. He's gone back to work for the tribes. So there will be a new regional administrator. But in the interim, Chad McIntosh, the commissioner, has indicated it's a top priority that he has, and they're working very closely with EPA on a pretty much a daily, if not week, at least daily business and weekly for sure.
I do want to make sure that that is communicated to the top levels. And I also want, if they can't meet what they told us they could meet, obviously they have no control over Tijuana per se, then I really would like them to come back and talk to us. Because when I told people the problem was going to be partially, so people just weren't accepting of the, they don't have faith anymore, I guess I should say.
I would tend to agree with them, Board Member Olson. The proof will be when we no longer see daily flows in the Tijuana River, which again, I've noted before and I'll note again, we did not have this situation in 2021. We had an operating PB-CELA. There were transboundary flows, but they were intercepted and diverted to the coast. It's really been since 2021 and the pipeline failure in 2022 that flows to the river have increased, and that the flows in the river have been in excess of what PB-CELA can divert. That dynamic in Tijuana is changing as Minute 328 projects are advanced, albeit very slowly. And so the new MOU between the federal governments identifies their funding commitments that Mexico made in 2022 and is holding them to those. And hopefully we will now see the River Gates project, the Colector Oriente, Colector Insurgente projects move forward, and interception and diversion of current flows. And I count them to be about 12 locations at about 19 million gallons of sewage a day will be routed into the collection system to be treated either at the new treatment plant expansion, the San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant, or has been the practice in the past, pumped to the coast and discharged untreated on the shoreline at Punta Bandera. Not desirable, but it's less of a problem for Imperial Beach and San Ysidro on the Tijuana River estuary than discharging it through the river itself. So it remains a frustratingly difficult dilemma to resolve, but we are continuing to make it our top priority with our relations with IBWC and EPA.
Also, I want to take this opportunity just to thank you for your diligence in this matter, and also all the staff that I know have been working on it. it is a thorny problem. And when we started it, I asked you how long it would take. And you said last time it took 10 years. I think we're right around that mark now, or maybe a little past. So patience is the word. Thank you very much.
I did have a question about your executive officer's report. With respect to the agricultural water quality seminar, first, I think that's great. We're involved in meetings like this, and this is when we need to be in the community. And I was just curious what the attendance was, like how many folks we thought, or what percentage of permit holders?
Kaylin, thank you very much.
My name is Kaylin Smith. I was the one who represented us at the Agricultural Water Quality Panel. And there was about 20 growers in attendance, and the audience was almost completely growers. There was one representative from the University of California Cooperative Extension in the audience, and then there was another one who spoke on the panel. But yeah, the attendance was about 20 growers, entirely growers.
Was that more or less than you were hoping for, or how did you advertise the event?
So we advertised the event by saying that this was going to be focused specifically on issues at avocado groves. And so the San Diego Region Irrigated Lands Group sent out a flyer made by the San Diego County Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures about the event to all of their members. So then we had more avocado growers coming to the event. There was some like wine growers, but the majority were avocado groves. And 20 is about a normal amount that we would expect. Like, for example, when we did the workshops for the agricultural order reissuance, the highest attendance we got was 60 growers. So 20 is about average.
Okay. And then given that avocados are grown all over the state of California, is this something that you're sharing with staff members in the different regions?
Yeah, so I've recently transitioned out of the agriculture program into the recycled water program. But one of the last things I was working on when I was in the ag program was creating like a regulatory working group with different regulatory agencies throughout our region. So that included the San Diego County Department of Ag Weights and Measures, also staff from Riverside County, as well as the city of San Marcos. And we were working on getting more regulatory agencies to kind of participate in this kind of regulatory working group so that we could kind of share what we were all working on, what issues that we were seeing, coordinate on inspections, that sort of thing. So it is early stages, but we were trying to work on something to kind of put us in more contact and communication with other regulatory agencies throughout our region so that we could have more of a impact on the issues that we were seeing throughout the region.
I think that's great. My question was more like, there's tons of avocados grown in Santa Paula that are not outside our region. Are our staff or the group that you're formerly part of speaking with staff up there? Because this, with the understanding that all conditions are not the same, a lot of it seems like it could be exported and shared across regions.
Yeah, and there is some inter-region communication, but that's mostly been focused on the Eastern San Joaquin order issues, not specifically like issues seeing at avocado groves.
Yeah, it just seems like you guys are doing great work, and that's we as board members meet across regions, every year at the Water Quality Coordinating Council. I wish there was a better avenue to share the fine work you're doing and export it to other regions that would find value in it so that they weren't having to create it from whole cloth.
Yeah, we have a irrigated lands roundtable that is held every quarter that has all of the staff from the regions in the different irrigated lands programs. So that's something that we can start sharing and like ask the state board to put on the agenda for those meetings.
Just recognizing your great work, and then it should go further than more people than just our region should get the benefit of it.
I just wanted to know who's following on with bringing this regulatory group together for our regional board.
So that would be the new staff in the program. So Amy Grove is the new supervisor in charge of the program. And then like Dave said, he just introduced Kaylee Popovich and Cole Rodriguez, who are the new staff in that program.
Okay, that's wonderful. And wonderful is, we've got it all set up. And then the other thing that I might say, we might be able to bring this up in the chairs meeting and have a very short report. And I think that would alert people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this month's executive officers report? And then with your permission, Chair Strong, I'd like to return to item number 3. There's a couple more things to add to my monthly border update. First, with staff, we have prepared a proposal to do sediment quality objectives, monitoring and assessment of the Tijuana River estuary. It is a project that would total about $1.3 million. I have shared it with the State Board Division of Financial Assistance. We're awaiting a decision on how they're going to apportion cleanup and abatement account of funds going forward. It will either be a standalone separate request or a special function of the State Board decision on that account. I'll keep you updated as we go forward on that. It would do 2 principal things. One is it evaluate the question that was asked by the County of San Diego, should the estuary be identified as a Superfund site? While we have had sediment analysis for chemistry here and there for various projects, and they have not identified a significant issue with legacy pollutants, that doesn't mean that they aren't there. So we want to do a comprehensive survey of the entire estuary system all the way up above the tidal bore to Dairy Mart Road. That would use sediment chemistry, toxicity, and benthic condition, always a favorite metric of mine, to evaluate the condition of the estuary. And now is an ideal window to do that before the infrastructure really goes into place. We want to be able to also document if we see a significant improvement in the estuary condition, and it could hardly get worse at this point, having lost all of the fish and having regular issues with anoxia. So we have that pending right now. I will be sharing it with the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team and gathering their input on it next week, and propose that we will send it up by memo to Division of Financial Assistance for their consideration. It would require a special action by the State Board since it is about $1.3 million. The other item that I wanted to address is also Proposition 4. It does appear, although I have not heard a final determination yet from the legislature, that there will be funds appropriated this fiscal year for Proposition 4 for the Border Rivers grant programs. It's not clear at this point how State Board will administer that. We have previously given them a vetted list of potential projects from the recovery team. I've updated that list. I've added Saturn Avenue, basically realigning the hydrology of that site and spanning it with perhaps a bridge or a very large culvert to the top of the list to address community concerns about the impacts from air quality there. Also, the opportunity to work with the county, who have identified themselves as a potential lead for that project, working with the Navy that owns the property and the city, which has jurisdiction over that area. Complicated project, but we proposed that would be funded by the State Board if there is money available during the coming year. We've identified other projects in carrying forward the recovery team mission, including the Nelson Sloan Quarry, which will be on your agenda next spring. I'll talk about that a little bit later on today, as well as local agency projects like the Tetrip Marsh restoration to remove accumulated sediment from uncontrolled discharges in Mexico that have grossly affected the estuary and facilitate its adaptation for climate change. Some of those sediments may be used for dune rehab, replenishment, and rehabilitation, hence the importance of that monitoring project that we're proposing for sediment quality objectives. The other aspect of that monitoring that I omitted to mention is, to the extent that they are doing dredging in the estuary, we have the opportunity with the 401 certification to direct it. And if we do find that there are contaminants of concern, those will become the priority areas for restoration. So we'll steer the Tetrip Marsh restoration phases to contaminated sediments if they are present, so that we can remove them from the system and restore the system both hydrologically, tidally, as well as chemically. So that is my report for this month, unless there are any questions on those or pending matters. Our recommendation to State Board on DFA is just a recommendation at this point, and it's an informal agency's consensus recommendation to State Board. Again, how they decide to allocate those funds and how they propose to roll them out is the State Board decision.
Thank you, David. I think that I hope they move quickly on that sediment funding, because having a baseline at this point is, I think, could be really important going forward. If we are able to get that extra 10 million gallons and dry up the river, at least for a while, being able to establish the results of that, I think, is going to be really important years from now. So hopefully getting a baseline before there's any significant changes.
And that could be a Proposition 4 funded project as well.
Yeah.
Dr. Olson, you had a question.
I do. I wanted to say I like the way the staff is doing sanitary spills right now, but the pie diagram that we had, I have lots of questions, and maybe there's some way we can have a Zoom or some other kind of way. I don't know if everyone's interested, then let's have yes, this. And I have a lot of detailed questions, so we probably don't need to go into them here. And the other thing I wanted to say, which is on page 17, and I think it's, it's on page 17. In that graph, you see sometimes the pit spills correspond with rain events and sometimes they follow them. I'd like to understand that a little better if possible. So both of those things, but it's a wonderful addition, at least for me. I love it. So thank you very much.
And Dr. Olson, just to clarify, would you like to have an individual briefing on this matter, or did you want us to agendize this for a future meeting?
Certainly everyone's welcome, and whether or not it's a specialized meeting or an agendized really depends on interest of the rest of the board, I would say.
In that case, I will work with staff to brief you first and answer your questions and decide from there whether to bring it back as an informational item or as a separate briefing for board members going forward. As you'll hear a little bit later today, sanitary sewer overflows and collection systems are an important priority for our implementing the San Diego River investigative order findings. And so there's an opportunity here that I've already identified with staff for board member briefings going forward to prepare you for those long-term complex projects.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope. Moving on to the consent calendar. Unless there's a request from the board or the public to comment or for an item to be removed from the consent calendar, I would like to call for a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I'll second.
Chris, call the roll, please.
Ms. Blair,
Aye.
Ms. Cantu,
Aye.
Ms. Olson, Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Ms. Warren,
Aye.
and Chair Strawn.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And Chair Strawn, if I could take this opportunity for a personal note and observation, I'd like to thank and ask the board to join me in thanking Christopher Means. This will probably be his last board meeting before you. He prepared one of the items on the consent calendar agenda. He's been an outstanding member of our team and one of my dearest colleagues, going back to stormwater days, 401 certification, and more programs than either of us really care to mention or years we care to count. But I wanted to thank Chris for his service to the board and the public and take this opportunity today.
As we old sailors like to say, fair winds and falling seas, Chris. Moving on to our informational item. Item 6, sea level rise. An updated Ocean Protection Council guidance and new National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration model. Jimmy, this item is expected to take about a half an hour. So let's go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Strawn and members of the board. I am Jimmy Smith, and I am here to introduce item 6, which is an informational item on sea level rise. Today, we are fortunate to have experts in the field with us to share their perspectives on the issue. They will cover a predictive model, some guidance that is available and recently updated, and other resources available to us and to interested stakeholders. As such, I will only provide a brief introduction trying to set the stage for why this is important. Sea level rise is a very important issue to the San Diego Water Board as we sit adjacent to the largest water body on the planet. And many of our beneficial uses rely on this proximity. Contact and non-contact recreation are probably the most famous and maybe the most threatened by rising seas. If we lose our beaches, we also lose one of the last free cooling zones that are important to this region as we face increasingly intense and frequent extreme heat events. This is especially important to our low-income and disadvantaged neighbors. Ecosystem beneficial uses are also threatened. Rocky intertidal and estuaries are at risk of losing their homes, essentially. As the seas deepen, the species that live there will no longer be able to live there as the waters get too deep. And of course, we have numerous economic uses, and this region relies heavily on that proximity to promote our economy. So the big question, how much sea level rise should we expect and when will it happen? So the short answer is we're not certain. But for the long answer, I will turn it over to the experts that I mentioned earlier. First, we'll hear from Ella McDougall of the Ocean Protection Council, who is a climate change program manager. And then we will hear from Leanna Heberer of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who is the West Coast Region Geospatial Analyst. So Ella, you are up, and I think I'll be running the slides for Ella. Both of them are attending remotely today.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. Hi, everyone, Chair Strawn and board members. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's truly an honor. My name is Ella McDougall, and I'm the Climate Change Program Manager at the Ocean Protection Council. And I'm really excited to walk through some of the key changes to OPC's 2024 Sea Level Rise Guidance Update. Slide, please. Uh-oh.
Hold tight, Ella. Technical difficulties. I was running the slides. I think I still am. Yeah, just continue on with these. Well, that's not right. Yeah, it's the PDF, not the PowerPoint. Well, that's in the PDF.
Yeah.
I apologize for the mix-up. Ella, we're going to take you out of order. We're going to go with Leanna first from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So Leanna, you're up, and we'll come back to you, Ella, once we get the presentation working. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Jimmy, and good morning, Chair Strawn and members of the board. Thank you so much for having me. I believe, am I able to share my screen? I see this is up, but I would love to be able to control the slides. All right, thank you so much for having me. Like I mentioned, my name is Liana Heber, and I'm a geospatial analyst for the West Coast region with the NOAA, or National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Office for Coastal Management. I'll be referring to this office as OCM, and I'm a contractor working with this group. And as our name implies, we focus on helping folks like yourselves in coastal states and counties with a plan for a changing coastline and how to incorporate the large ecosystem of resources that we provide as an office that hopefully will be useful to you all. So for the brevity of this talk, I just have about 10 minutes. We know you have a large county and scope of issues to deal with, but we also understand you need to understand your risks, connect and communicate, and plan for action for sea level rise in San Diego. So today I'm going to do a very quick tour of the NOAA Digital Coast and a very quick demo of our NOAA Sea Level Calculator. So our office, the Office for Coastal Management, our flagship resource is our huge online repository called the Digital Coast. And it's our free public service to the nation for providing more than almost 3,000 data sets in mostly elevation, coastal land cover, and satellite imagery. A wide variety, more than 80 decision support tools. This includes socioeconomic and geospatial portals, dashboards, and models to help decision makers, and hundreds of hours of free training resources. So this is in-person, self-guided modules, hybrid, and many of these are for professional credits with our large Digital Coast partnership. So it's not just NOAA, Office for Coastal Management, hosting these resources, but we have a large think tank of the listed associations here that give us feedback and work together so that grounds our data and tools in the reality of what folks need on a planning basis. So before I head into our demo for our Sea Level Calculator tool, when we mentioned understanding your risks, we heard from our Digital Coast partnership in developing this tool that folks are looking to recognize local sea level rise trends, explore different thresholds, and look at future inundation potential. And so I'm going to tell you what our tool does and what it does not do before I head into the demo. So what our Sea Level Calculator tool offers is NOAA is a national administration, so we focus on national. This is a screening level tool for historical tidally influenced water levels. That means that NOAA has operated this national water level observation network for many decades. And with this, these are tide gauges around the nation, 2 in San Diego area, that we can monitor local sea level. And with enough data, let's say 30 to 50 years, we can look at the relative sea level trends. And so this is tidally influenced water levels. This is not necessarily riverine data, and this is not a dynamic ocean atmosphere model that we know. The dynamics between ocean and atmosphere obviously plays a huge role in water levels. What our tool offers is also a visualization of federal sea level data and predictions. And I have listed here what I think Ella was about to cover is the updated California sea level rise guidance and the Ocean Protection Council is very much in line with our 2022 federal sea level rise technical report that was released. This covers observation-based trajectories out to 2050, which we consider the near term, based on water level data that we've seen so far. This, of course, includes uncertainty that I can cover a little bit later, but should be noted. There's also modeled projections based out to the midterm and long term out to 2150, 2100. This is based on the best available data so far and understanding of our physical drivers of sea level rise, and includes 5 sea level rise magnitude scenarios that I know are also echoed in the California state guidance. This does not mean that this tool is a parcel-based risk or vulnerability assessment. However, we really hope that it will help planners like yourself as a first step into doing your own localized vulnerability assessments. Lastly, our tool has maps of inundation based on a modified bathtub model. So this means that the elevation or topography of the region with how that is connected to the ocean or tidally influenced water levels, and how that looks at areas at or below a certain water level in the future. So here we have what 3.5 feet of inundation might look like. We recognize that there are models out there that I'm sure folks on GIS teams are using called Cosmos from the USGS. This is based on hydrodynamic models that includes precipitation, storms, waves, groundwater, all really important processes to include. We provide our inundation levels on a national level based on this bathtub model. So I'm going to go ahead and head into our sea level calculator demo. I'm going to cover 2 topics today that I can show you. The first, I'm going to head onto our Digital Coast website here and head over to our
Leanna, we're having a little bit of a echo and some background noise on your microphone. If you could maybe move your microphone, I think maybe it's bumping with your hand or something recently.
Oh no. Okay. It's from my computer, so I can try to clear something out from here, but I hope it doesn't persist. Is that still echoing? I'm not hearing anything, so I'm gonna.
Well, I'm gonna chime in here. Could you, one thing that would help us, I can hear you all right, but if you could talk a little slower, it may be that it's a combination. It's just a suggestion. No, what?
Sure. Yes, I will. Is everyone able to see the screen okay? I know I can't see my presentation here.
Yeah, this is better. And just wherever your hands were, I think that noise was coming through on your microphone.
Okay, thank you so much for the feedback. So I'm on the Digital Coast website here, which is our main platform for accessing our tools, data, and training. I'm going to head over to our Tools tab and show you what this landing page looks like and head down to our featured tools here. This is the sea level calculator, and I will go ahead and launch. And I'm showing you just how to get to this so that anyone in the room who is a planner and using this tool can access. So this is the sea level calculator landing page. And before we search for San Diego, there's many FAQs and videos, instructional videos, and areas to access the data that we are displaying in our dashboard that you all can replicate on for yourself so that it's very transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and put in San Diego, and we're going to see this first landing page of this. We see gridded data, and then the blue marks are also our tide gauges. So I'm going to head to La Jolla for today, and we see that our record of water levels is since 1924. I'm going to click on this, and we see 5 what we call quick views. Again, hearing back from our stakeholders, they wanted 5 different bins of information of how to look at water data that would be useful in planning. So I'm going to cover future sea levels and extreme water levels today, but I hope that you and folks in the public can also look at seasonal variation and changes in flood frequency. So this is a lot to ingest all at once. I'm going to toggle some things off and orient us really quickly. So what we can see here is we have a map with our tide gauge and various charts that, as I click around, all tie to each other. And I hope this is informational, especially in the context of Ella's presentation, because this is our NOAA's service of providing a dynamic visualization of the data that is behind a lot of the decisions that were made on a federal basis and guidance for the state level that I know that OPC had referenced. So we have over here a set of customizable buttons that include reference datums for any analysis that you might need. We have mean high water, mean sea level, which I'm going to be referring to today. And then also for the engineers in the room, we do the math for you to convert between datums. We also have units and vertical land motion, which we encourage folks on a local level to put in if you have any very specific vertical land motion that you see. So I'd love us to take a look at the blue line here, which is data since 1970 that shows what the water levels have been doing up until 2020. With this data, we have extrapolated based on the observations out to 2050 or the near term with some high confidence on what we expect to see. Based on, I'm going to start to click on these sea level rise magnitudes by the year 2100 and what that is modeled out based on global emissions downscaled to a regional area and the associated uncertainty. So we have a low scenario, an intermediate, low, intermediate emissions, intermediate, high, and high that correspond to sea level rise magnitudes. And as we zoom in, we can see that our blue extrapolation line is following intermediate. So I'm going to turn off these two. This is important to us because as we can start to visualize in the near term what kind of scenario as a whole, and for the guidance from the state, we can start to think about collectively an intermediate trajectory. I'll scroll down here and head over to this chart, and we have planning decades by 2030, 2040, all the way to 2100. When I look at our intermediate scenario that we've identified, I can see that we're expecting at the La Jolla tide gauge 0.79 feet of sea level rise. And I hope you notice that as we click here, we can see different contributions of sea level rise based on vertical land motion, oceanographic processes, and also distant but important ice sheet dynamics. So I know that's a lot to take in, but the main here is that it looks like our data for San Diego, at least at the La Jolla tide gauge is falling intermediate. I'm going to head back out and look at our extreme water levels. And again, we have dynamic charts that are tied to our thresholds that we can put in. From the last view, we saw mean sea level. I'm going to keep it as that. I'm going to head to mean sea level so we can see how this data is progressing. So like the last quick view, we see that in blue, that's the data that we know that we've observed but from the La Jolla tide gauge since I think it's 1905. And we can see peaks of maximum water levels. And we can also see events of these water levels and when they occurred and a little description of why that occurred. This is important because as we all live in the next couple of years, seeing some of these maximum water level events happen, it grounds us in some personal data that we can start to see. We also have in these colors the water level events. So we have a 50-year water level event, a 10, a 2, and a 1-year water level event. And as I head down here, I can see that in the intermediate scenario, a 50-year water level event recurrence will have a 5.89 feet above mean sea level. So I know that's a lot of information to take in. I'll head back to the presentation and talk about why this matters. So this helps us to understand your risks in San Diego. The near term, so out to 2050, regional extrapolation is looking like it's following the intermediate trajectory. So as listed here, that looks like 0.79 feet by 2050. And then out to our long-term range, we can see that there's going to be uncertainties here with things that we can't predict yet in the science, and also up to emissions on human activity. NOAA is not in the business of telling local municipalities how to plan. We provide the data and the tools for you to do that. However, the California state guidance has said that the sea level rise in California are most likely to rise to 0.8 feet for the intermediate scenario by 2050. This allows us to start to take the data in these tools and tinker around and look at infrastructure that might have a high tolerance for risk that you could plan with the intermediate scenario, for example, and infrastructure that might have a very low risk tolerance to start to look at maybe the intermediate high or high scenario. And the utility of our tools is that you can customize and input different vertical land motion, different thresholds that you're looking at on a local level. And this also allows you to look at future inundation potential. So like we saw on the extreme water levels in the near term, under the scenario that we are following currently, again, a 50-year water event will look like almost 6 feet above mean sea level. Lastly, I want to go through a couple of resources that can hopefully help with connecting and communicating, and especially for public forums such as this, developing charts and graphics for outreach and reports. So we have a few tools, one being the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, where you can toggle on different socioeconomic vulnerability, potential pollution sources from the EPA, and take a look at what might be inundated in the future. We also have economic data that is available by sector, total ocean economy, and by year that you can toggle through and export as images, put into presentations. And we also have resources such as Digital Coast trainings so that you can prepare and educate your staff and stakeholders. And so this is a large repository, of mitigation based, of case studies, of interactive modules, of in-person training that are all free to use. And we hope that can help ground everyone in similar language going forward. And we also have some case studies of peer-to-peer case studies that you can learn from other folks who are using these tools and who have already started to be doing projects that I'm sure are happening in San Diego at the moment. And we also know that you need to plan for action and maybe conduct your own models for future dynamic scenarios. So we provide the data access viewer on our website that has high resolution imagery, high resolution land cover, which includes impervious, canopy, water, and soon for San Diego, a wide variety of wetland classifications, LiDAR point clouds and elevation, and our inundation layers that are available on our tools are available for download for incorporation into different models. Lastly, this might interest folks who are interested in our local wetlands. We do have also, visualizations that you can customize based on how wetlands might be changing in the future, based on our land cover data and our inundation layers. So bringing this all together, again, we see that this region is on an intermediate trajectory, and this does not include wave, storm surge, precipitation, and other factors that will push the water levels higher. And I hope that if anything from this presentation, that there's resources on a federal level and a state level that are available for free that we continuously update, and that we have a huge partnership through the Digital Coast for collaboration and connection making that will hopefully help you in your decisions in the future. And with that, I would love to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanna. Any questions? Go ahead.
So I wondered why, it's interesting about the bathtub model. It's been around for a long time. Why is that the model of choice?
Thank you for the question. And it's the model of choice for the capacity and the scale that we're conducting this. So I showed the San Diego region. We do this on a national scale, updating about every 6 months based on newly available data. So we work closely with USGS and other folks who do models and help inform and provide layers there as well. But for our scope on a national level, the bathtub model is what we can get out quickly. We can provide as a starting point for folks to conduct their own modeling.
Okay, and so I would imagine, so do you know what the sensitivity of the model is, or this may be the wrong word, the specificity or the range of prediction with the confidence limits? In other words, your range, you gave us 3 ranges. Are those different? So you had a low prediction, a medium prediction, a higher prediction. Are those the confidence intervals, the low and the high? Or are they actually, each one has its own confidence intervals?
Yeah, it's a huge, there's a lot of detail to that. So the intermediate, the low, those sea level rise projections that I had toggled on and off, those are based on the IPCC assessment report, socioeconomic pathways. So the range between those are about emissions uncertainties in the future. We provide uncertainty bounds on our data, that is the 17th and I think 83rd percentile, that will show process uncertainty of what we know to date. And then out to the long term, that's a lot of the low confidence processes like that we don't know currently in the science what will happen with large dynamics.
And I wanted to ask a question. It's not directly related to your presentation, but it's the paper that was recently published. It was in regard, I think, to Europe. And they went out and they measured high and low tide measurements for over 100 years. And the predictions were very different. And so they were something like 1.5 millimeters. It was published in one of, you know how Nature has a whole bunch of little spin-offs now, you know, I don't remember which one, but do you have a feeling for that? In other words, they just took all the data on high loads and high tides and low tides and.
So we understand that there's relative sea level rise, and the fact that you know, there's subsidence and uplift happening at different rates around on our coast, especially, you know, with the Chula Vista Aquifer. Then we know there's some subsidence happening there, which is why our tools we want to have customizable as much as possible. One, to relate to different tidal or the vertical datums for engineers. We want to make sure that you can input your own vertical land motion if you have more accurate to your region satellite data to help with that. We want to kind of create this tool that you can customize to your local area, because we know that we can only provide what we have for the National Water Level Observation Network. So in a sense, there will absolutely be new research that we hope we can customize for you to look at a local level. I don't have personally, I can't speak to the paper that you're referencing.
I will. I'm sorry, I couldn't find more information on the spur of the moment to tell you. The other thing I wanted to comment, anyone who doesn't really understand seawater level changes, if you've ever had the opportunity to go to Ephesus, which in 1 AD was a deep sea port, and today is about over 9 miles from the sea. So they're quite drastic changes. And your model represents that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leanna. It doesn't look like we have any other questions in the room for you. So now we will turn it over to Ella. And I do have to apologize. Earlier, I said we had technical difficulties, but it wasn't the technical team. It was my mistake. So I'm sorry about that. So Ella, are you ready? Are you still there, Ella? You're muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Great. Got you. And just let me know when you want to
Okay.
change slides.
0 for 2, but we're going to get there. Okay. Hi, everybody, for the third time. Thank you so much for having me, Chair Strawn and board members. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Again, my name is Ella McDougall, and I'm the Climate Change Program Manager with the Ocean Protection Council. So today it's really interesting actually to have Liana's presentation first. You get kind of the technical deep dive on what I'm going to talk about. So now we're kind of going to zoom out, yet be more applicable to California. And we're going to go through the key changes of OPC's 2024 Sea Level Rise Guidance Update. Slide, please. Just a little bit of background on the Ocean Protection Council. If you're not familiar, OPC was established in 2024 through the Ocean Protection Act, which plays a key role in advancing coastal and ocean resilience, policy, and science across our state. Our executive director serves as the Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy, which means we're also a cabinet level agency. Our mission is to ensure that California maintains healthy, resilient, and productive ocean and coastal ecosystems for both current and future generations, and that applies to human communities and biological habitats. We have several strategic priorities, which are on the slide. They're all equally important, of course, and they deserve the same amount of weight. But today we're going to be talking about climate change, the first one, and adaptation, in particular sea level rise. Our work is rooted in providing the best available science to inform decision-making, which is why today's discussion about the sea level rise guidance update is so important, because it is exactly that. It is science that informs recommendations for making good decisions. One little note that our strategic plan, which is showed on the screen, as you see, it's 2020 to 2025. We are updating our strategic plan, and we anticipate that the final draft will be released in November with an adoption by our council in December. Slide, please. Okay, though we're talking about the 2024 guidance today, it's important to note that it's the fourth iteration of this document, and it serves as an update to the previous 2017 to 2018 version. The biggest difference from that guidance in 2017 and 2018 is that the science and policy recommendations were actually released in two different documents. So they fit together, but they weren't streamlined. In this update, we're combining them into a single comprehensive streamlined document guidance, and it makes it a lot more accessible and actionable for planners and users. The previous 2018 guidance provided sea level rise projections for 12 tide gauge locations along California's coast, and it used a probabilistic modeling approach, which means it estimated the likelihood of different sea level rise scenarios based on emission levels and other factors. The guidance also talked about the extreme scenario, the famous H++ or doomsday glacier scenario, which accounts for a full potential ice sheet collapse. In addition to these projections, the 2018 guidance outlined a stepwise process to help communities select an appropriate sea level rise scenario based on their risk tolerance and planning needs, like a specific project or a more regional approach. The document also provided recommendations for adaptation planning across different sectors, ensuring that local governments had a structured approach for sound decision-making. Slide, please. So the 2024 update was adopted at the June 2024 OPC Council meeting, and it incorporates significant science updates and policy refinements as compared to that previous guidance I mentioned. The update was developed through an expert collaboration process with input from our science task force, which you can see on the right of the screen. And it was coordinated in partnership with the Ocean Science Trust. The science task force included leading experts from NASA JPL, USGS, the UC system, California Sea Grant, and other folks and other groups. We worked very closely with the state agency Sea Level Rise Collaborative to ensure that our guidance aligns with ongoing statewide adaptation and sea level rise resilience efforts. That includes the State Water Board, as well as therefore 16 other state agencies who are working on sea level rise and coastal resilience. One of the biggest changes is the shift in this guidance. One of the biggest changes is the shift away from probabilistic projections and towards a scenario-based approach, which aligns California's planning approach with NOAA's 2022 Sea Level Rise Technical Report and ensures consistency between state of California and national level climate planning. This is really great that Liana already went, because now you know the guidance at the national level, and California now aligns completely with the national approach for sea level rise. Slide, please. So as I previously mentioned, in 2018, we used probabilistic projections, which estimate the likelihood of different sea level rise outcomes. In 2024, we've shifted to scenario-based, which better accounts for the high impact risks. It improves long-term planning and ensures that planners and decision makers can be prepared for the possible range of futures rather than relying on a single probability estimate. that may even underestimate some of the extreme outcomes. And so, as you can see on the slide, the new sea level rise projections, I'll just quickly break it down. By 2050, the intermediate scenario would be considered, and it accounts for 0.8 feet of sea level rise. So that's kind of our ballpark target for 2050. 2100, if you look at the low to intermediate, we're looking at around 1 to 3.1 feet. And then for the intermediate to high, 3.1 to 6.6. So you can see that the range of certainty here for 2100 starts to widen. And higher scenarios account for different factors in what might happen with sea level rise, such as rapid ice sheet loss contributions. And then by 2150, the range even further broadens to include other larger uncertainties and physical processes. So you'll see intermediate low to high scenarios can range anywhere from 2.6 to 11.9 feet. And the high end scenarios would reflect those worst case scenarios with ice sheet loss. And the lower scenarios would mean significant emissions reductions. We actually generally don't really consider the low scenario because it would mean curbing emissions at an extreme scale. This update also incorporates, importantly, vertical land motion, which Leanna already touched on, which is great. And those are incorporated into the scenarios, which means subsidence or uplift would be factored into the localized estimates. So this statewide chart that you see on the slide, it includes VLM as a state average, which when averaged across the state is actually very close to zero and therefore essentially negligible for a statewide approach. And that's why in this chart, it's not actually included. However, when you go to the appendix of the guidance, you will see the tide gauge scenarios, which is best practice if you're a local planner to use a tide gauge scenario. And that includes the local VLM from that area, and therefore it's a much more precise estimate of sea level rise. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we know that this is where the guidance kind of starts to deviate from some of the topics that Leanna was discussing. Sea level rise isn't just about those higher ocean levels, it also seriously exacerbates coastal hazards. And so the updated guidance emphasizes how sea level rise interacts with flooding, storm events, erosion, groundwater rise, contaminated sites. All of these are risks for communities, habitats, and infrastructure. And I think this chapter kind of encapsulates some of the real world implications, impacts, and more of the more complex variables when planning for sea level rise. So I find it pretty interesting and kind of more applicable for what we see in the real world. One specific area of interest for San Diego region is how sea level rise is going to influence the rate of retreat on coastal cliffs and bluffs and beach erosion. About 72% statewide of our coastlines actively include eroding sea cliffs or bluffs, many of which support the coastal communities that are built on top of those uplifted marine terraces. And as sea levels rise, those cliffs will be exposed to more wave impacts more frequently, and that will accelerate erosion and increase the risk of increased risk to bluff top development and infrastructure. And so in San Diego County, particularly in the north, there's more development built atop those bluffs, and they are already seen to be eroding. And so as sea levels continue to rise, those areas will face increasing threats and cliff retreat, and that will even happen, of course, in areas where coastal armoring is present, which, as we know, can exacerbate sea level rise and erosion in surrounding areas. We also know that flooding will continue to worsen. One example of this, as shown in the guidance, is that if you add a 100-year storm, that will start to occur far more frequently than it does now. And those sea level rise will compound with flooding, and without intervention, we're looking at approximately 24 to 75% of California's sandy beaches that would be seasonably or permanently lost due to sea level rise. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get into the section of the guidance that is more of an approach to our policy guidance, and this is really applicable for local and regional jurisdictions and planners. It includes a stepwise process for integrating sea level rise scenarios into planning on projects. The key recommendation is that projects and planning should evaluate intermediate, intermediate high, and high sea level rise scenarios with and without a 100-year storm condition. That's essentially 6 different scenarios. We acknowledge that some of the total water levels may be very similar when you actually sum out the water level on those 6 scenarios. And so that's okay. And it can be used to describe 2 different potential futures. The guidance discusses adaptation pathways, trade-offs, triggers, and thresholds as different approaches to implement adaptive management. Risk assessments are also emphasized, encouraging decision makers to balance economic, environmental, and social trade-offs when selecting their adaptation strategies. Next slide, please. So here's the stepwise approach. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but first you select your nearest tide gauge and you select a time horizon, which would probably be dependent on your project type or your planning scope. The guidance has scenario values for out to 2150, and that may or may not be feasible for whatever purpose you're using for a smaller type of project. In this version of the guidance, we also note that instead of a time horizon, it's equally valid to use like a water level that corresponds with an adaptation phase and kind of work backwards that way. Slide, please. And then I've already mentioned that projects and planning, we generally recommend they use the intermediate high, and the high sea level rise scenario with and without a 100-year storm condition to find water levels that ensure planning is resilient in the long term and give the full suite of future scenarios that may occur. And in assessing vulnerability, exposure should be assessed via a visualization tool like what Liana discussed, or Cosmos, or even a more localized tool or model. Next slide, please. And a new addition to this guidance, which is step 5, which focuses on exploring adaptation options before committing to an implementation strategy. And so rather than jumping directly into a project, this step encourages communities to assess the technical and financial feasibility of different adaptation strategies, engage stakeholders to build community buy-in and ensure that all community needs are represented and addressed, and used a risk-based decision framework to select the best long-term solution. This step supports a phased trigger-based approach and also simultaneously allows flexibility as conditions change or develop. And then step 6 addresses risk aversion and how to utilize the scenarios. Slide, please. Okay, so that was the whole wrap up of the 2024 Sea Level Rise Guidance. As you can see, it builds on previous policy and incorporates the latest science, even the national level science. We also find, hopefully, that it streamlines planning processes and in terms long-term resilience. So I'm open to any questions and discussion, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Verdugo, for your presentation. I believe this question will probably be for Mr. Smith. With all this information, how have we applied this to, where things can go very, very wrong? In my experience, it's always the worst case scenario we have to plan for. It's the perfect storm that takes out our wastewater treatment plants. I'm particularly interested in our region. If you were to apply this scenarios at probably the worst case scenario, because that's what we are held responsible to plan for. What plants do we lose? Do we lose the International Treatment Plant? Do we lose Point Loma? What happens?
Great question, Chair or Board Member Cantu. And we are not trying to create new programs with sea level rise, but we are trying to integrate this information into our existing work. So as you mentioned, our publicly owned treatment works are vulnerable, some of them. And right now, as it stands for all the forecasts, none of them face inundation or flooding. So we start to look at that. We require each of them to submit to us a climate change action plan, which identifies vulnerabilities, not only from sea level rise, but also from things such as increased atmospheric rivers, which will increase the inflow and infiltration that may lead to capacity issues. So we are watching it in probably the 100-year time horizon, well beyond our permit issues. And that's one of our challenges, that we're looking at regional issues on global scales that are looking at 50 to 100 years while we're dealing with 5-year permits that may go for 10 years. So we are looking at POTWs in particular. One of the other interesting areas is the estuaries that we saw. with Leanna's talk that are vulnerable. So we're looking at how can those estuaries migrate inland and still support the beneficial uses therein. One of the ideas we're exploring through the 401 program is land preservation. Can we do some land preservation as potentially a way to hold those areas so that when the tides rise, we can still see viable habitat for the species that inhabit that intertidal area?
So if I were to understand you correctly, even at the worst case scenario, within, and I'm not really that keen on the 100 years. I mean, let's just figure 50 years, a lifetime of a plant. I mean, we lose plants with high weather events, high storm events anyway, that aren't even at the coast. I mean, we just lose them for a variety of reasons. So what I understood you to say is even with the worst case scenarios, looking at 100 years, you're not seeing our wastewater treatment plants are vulnerable. Is that what I understood?
Well, let me back up a little bit because I don't want to go on record necessarily and saying, hey, we're good for the next 100 years based on all the potential for sea level rise, right? We are looking at that and we're requiring the permit holders to look at that. Ultimately, it's their responsibility to assess the risks that they're facing and present that information to us. And then we evaluate that information and hopefully make sure they're staying in compliance with permit conditions. But yes, for the most part, right now, I'm more worried about things like larger storm events, which we've already seen knock out some of our treatment plants in not too far from here, and they shut down for a good week. We see a lot of erosion happening from those events that are exposing sewer collection system pipes that then break, and we don't see them for a while because it's flowing into these big streams. So I think that's more of a threat that we're facing right now to our beneficial uses than potentially sea level rise inundating some of our treatment plants.
I have a question, and I realize this might be outside the scope of the presentation, but what jumps off the page from both of our presenters today is like what a challenge this faces to the private property owners in the areas that we were looking at and highlighting. And frankly, the homeowners insurance market in California is already enough of a nightmare. So what, if anything, are you folks, as you're creating this data and making it available to the public and presumably anyone who wants to access doing it, like, does anyone have a lens on how to protect consumers in this scenario? And what are we doing to make sure this data is not used, frankly, against more people? And again, that might be outside the scope, but that like jumps off the page when you guys present this information.
Yeah, Leanna, you want to take a shot at that one?
I can try. All I can say is that that is an incredibly nuanced question. And I know that there is some really interesting work happening in the insurance market with sea level rise, but you know, we try to kind of take more of a holistic approach and really look at like the regional impact and empower other agencies to take a broader, you know, their own approach. I know that some of this, I think some of your question might be even more interesting if the Coastal Commission were here today talking about, you know, development and redevelopment. But otherwise, it is a little bit out of our scope in terms of private property. And that is certainly, you know, something that the local planners, local governments might look at a little differently than we do.
We do have it on our list to try and develop an internal policy for this board, and we would borrow heavily from some of the documents put out by the Coastal Commission. And as probably most of you know, the Coastal Commission does have a mandate to allow property owners to protect their properties if they were built before a certain time and existed before some of the Coastal Act provisions kicked in to armor and protect those areas. Now, some of the local communities are actually moving, and they've done this for probably 10 years or so, to write into deed restrictions that say, if you're building on this bluff, you are not allowed to protect it. Even so, that Coastal Commission provision is not applicable to your property. So if we get to that point where these properties are at risk of, you know, falling in, then it's their responsibility to almost clean that up. And, you know, one of the terms we're trying to get away from is managed retreat. So I prefer the idea of strategic relocation. And I think insurance and some of the costs and some of the science that we're seeing from sea level rise start to be the factors that drive that strategic relocation.
I just wonder if anyone has an eye on what kind of obligations we have to individuals who are impacted as we generate this data. That's my like basic. And again, I don't think this is relevant to like the folks necessarily who presented today. I think that's a big picture question, but I just like this science is so important, but I also hope that we don't lose track of what the impacts of it are on like the ground level.
Yeah. And to reiterate, we're kind of focusing on the beneficial use threats as our jurisdiction. I've had broach conversations with the state insurance commissioner and trying to peel back the layers on what they're thinking about this. And as far as I can tell, they're telling me they're thinking about it, but they're not willing to share exactly what they're thinking about.
Yes, I wanted to ask, although I think what I would like to understand is in looking at exposure of sewer pipes or water pipes, do any of your programs or models take into account information in GIS? Are you able to get GIS integrated in from local agencies? Because that tells you the location of all the pipes and therefore.
So we here regionally have started a mapping project that takes a lot of the data from folks like NOAA and the Cosmos model that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to overlay that with infrastructure. And we've been fairly successful in getting the GIS maps of all the collection systems that's out there. We know where the treatment plants are. We know where things like San Onofre nuclear generating station is. And those are some of the key infrastructure that we're trying to locate on this map. And then as we layer it up with sea level rise, we kind of start to think about the threats that we're looking at. So we can ask those key questions, not only through a permit revision, but also through inspections now. As we go out to treatment plants or collection system agencies, we can start to ask them like, hey, we're looking at this map and it looks like your system is at risk under certain scenarios. What are you guys doing about it? And that's when, you know, we expect schedules and some kind of financing to take place so that they can actually do something real. One of my frustrations been at reviewing climate change action plans is there's a lot of identification of threats, high risk threats even, but very little planning. Sometimes it comes back and says, we actually are going to do this now or within the next 5 to 10 years, and here's how we're going to pay for it.
Well, I'm aware of a treatment plant in South Orange County that had to do hardening to put up, it's in a low area, flooding, it became an issue, so they had to put up some kind of wall barrier. The other thing, can we learn anything from these? It isn't related to water or any of our things, but we know there's a huge transportation issue with the train line that runs between San Diego and it goes to Irvine, LA, it goes to a lot of places. And I think it's being rebuilt now due to high tidal effects. Is that correct? Or
yeah, the low sand line that runs Del Mar, Solana Beach, San Clemente has been famously shut down many times due to erosion along those areas. There's been a lot of debate over what to do with that line, how far they move it. I think the latest is they decided to keep it where it is for now.
No, they did.
Yeah. But other areas like Highway 5 near Mission Bay, that's pretty close as well. So these are issues that we have our eyes on and that we're participating in things like the 5th California Climate Change Assessment Project, making sure that the people who have that responsibility, Caltrans in this case, are aware of these things. And they are. Caltrans is doing a good job of paying attention to this.
And then this isn't in our bailiwick either, but you look at these homes that I think about Imperial Beach. There's an end of Imperial Beach where they're sort of built, it looks like they're built on a rock seawall. And San Clemente, the homes are falling down the cliff. I think that's also true in Pacific Palisades. So wastewater pipes and pipes have to be exposed. Are there any lessons learned that we can take from those and bring to our area before they're actually doing that?
Two areas I would offer up. One, when it comes to collection system pipes, trying to get some better minimum industry standards for how far to bury those pipes and what kind of soil analysis are being conducted and what kind of flooding they are to be protected from would be a great leap for us. We had a couple of those spills, most famous, I think, Tecolote Canyon, where that happened. So we're trying to push that as we revise our permits. Also, the city of Oceanside, and they have frequent flooding right along the coast highway there, and their homes are threatened. And they are learning from this and trying to do some adaptation principles. They have a pilot projects in place right now, well, in the very early draft stages, to build some groins and do some rock placement along the area to protect the beaches. We will be involved in that. We have been involved in providing comments already, but eventually they'll need a 401 certification from us as well. I also sit on a subcommittee with the city of San Diego as they're looking at various pilot projects to try and protect some of their coastal beaches. And, we're trying to learn from other areas up in Huntington Beach where they've done some of these groins and applying that to protect our uses down here.
That's great. And so maybe as things progress over the years, we can get updates.
Absolutely. Just let me
Okay,
know.
thank you. Thank both of you too. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It looks like we have about another hour of the public session, so I'm going to suggest we take a break here. 10 minutes?
Certainly, Chair. Before we take a break, can we just note for the record that we don't have any speaker cards for this item and no one online wishing to address the board? Thank you. Then I wholeheartedly support a
All right.
break.
Sorry.
We don't have one. We don't have another hour.
Yeah, we got two of them, they're each about up to a half an hour, a little less. Yeah. And now we have two action items. Item 7, resolution endorsing the fiscal year 2025-2026 operational plan. Mr. Executive Officer.
Good morning, Chair Strawn, members of the board. It is still morning. It is my pleasure today to present our annual update and the tentative resolution for this year's fiscal year just starting operation plan, resolution R9 2025-0129. And if you will allow me a personal aside, this was also the last board meeting of another one of my dearest colleagues. They're beginning to drop like flies. Cynthia Gorham and I started at the Water Board in 25 years, 2 months, and 7 days ago, but I'm not counting. And this is going to be her last board meeting with you today, so I want to acknowledge her before she goes on leave and retires this year. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for some outstanding work. And also it came to my attention while the meeting started that this morning, one of our staff demonstrated the exemplar service that we expect have come to take for granted. There was a car accident immediately in front of our building, and Joe Werty, who was on staff early in the morning, and we heard it and ran out there, brought 2 people out of the car, and then called 911. So he was an immediate prompt responder and demonstrated the public service to safety that we've come to take for granted. So I wanted to thank Joe for being so thoughtful and so responsive in the urgency. Also, at this point, I want to acknowledge that there was a grammatical error in the executive officer's report, summary report, and the resolution. We have 22 projects this year, not 26. 4 projects failed to make the final cut, but the math didn't get updated on the spreadsheet. So for finding number 4, I want to offer the errata of changing 26 to 24 projects. With that, move on. For our 24-25 accomplishments, that fiscal year was a challenging one for us. As you may or may not know, we were required because of budget issues to hold about 20% of our positions vacant for the entirety of the year while we were looking at long-term cuts. Fortunately, nonetheless, we were able to complete most of the work on the 21 projects that were identified in that fiscal year's plan of 11.4 personnel years. We were able to, for example, bring to you for your consideration and approval 2 advanced restoration plans for the Tijuana River for bacterial indicators and trash. And I'll talk about them again a little bit later. We have also provided oversight to the IBWC that has ensured their return to compliance last year in November and enabled us to work with them and for you to consider on the 27th a cease and desist order to regulate their taking on additional 10 million gallons as the interim first step of their treatment plant expansion. That could not have happened if they had not already come back into compliance with the previous CDO and with the time and schedule orders. We also saw a successful implementation of state funds on a trash boom in the Tijuana River. It was deployed just before the rainy season began last year, and it collected over 750 tons of trash in the main channel, where it was practicable to remove it before it reaches the canopy downstream, public and private properties, and estuary and Pacific Ocean habitats. You also received the final reports on the San Diego River Investigative Order, a groundbreaking effort nationally as well as statewide in terms of addressing sources and conveyance of human fecal waste. We're still digesting what that means. Sorry for the bad pun, looking at how to implement that in our regulatory actions. But among the things we'll be looking at and for your consideration in coming years will be an update to our sanitary sewer collection system permits to address overflows and exfiltration, as well as the sanitary sewer overflows themselves and how we regulate them. This region was the first in the state and the nation to actually put out a permit for our sanitary sewer overflows to regulate them. So again, we will take a lead on how to address these issues. You also adopted last year in March a time schedule order for bacterial indicators for the TMDL. But what you may not recall is that our staff went out in the field last summer on 2024 to collect samples, dry weather runoff. They wanted to evaluate the cost of compliance and also to find out what we're seeing in some of those dry weather flows in terms of water quality conditions in the San Diego River watershed, among others. You also approved the San Diego County Local Area Management Plan. Nonetheless, we have work to do there to ensure that on-site waste treatment systems regulated by the county are also not sources of fecal waste. So we'll be working on that as well, but it was an accomplishment to complete that. And you were able to fulfill longstanding commitments to adopt salt and nutrient management plans for San Juan Creek and the Temecula Valley groundwater basins. And then finally, as is detailed in our update, our staff have represented you on our practical vision very well in a number of forums and advocacies. And you and I and others have represented the board at the Troyes Creek Blue-Green Infrastructure Initiative, looking at ways to retrofit our communities to serve multiple purposes, and also to represent our region's concerns in agriculture. So for this year's Practical Vision Operations Plan, we've identified 22 projects totaling 17,360 staff hours, of about 10 per personnel years out of 77 that we currently have. This is, of course, only a fraction of our programmatic work that we perform to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our region's waters. As we have done in years past, we are organizing our work on the basis of key beneficial uses in key areas. We identified and you approved 4 key beneficial uses, and we've identified 8 outcomes and 22 strategies to achieve those outcomes. And the projects that are on the operations plan are among those to achieve those. We also have an executive team and senior team stay on course committee to make sure that we are focused on this work and responsive to your policy direction in these key areas. So for healthy aquatic ecosystems, biological objectives, certainly one of our flagship projects for regulating on the basis of environmental outcomes rather than programs, policies, and funding. Chair Strawn, Board Member Cantu, Jeremy Haas, Chad Laughlin, and I represented you at the State Water Resources Control Board workshop on biological objectives, and our staff are currently meeting with concerned stakeholders and preparing resolution language for the State Board to approve to move forward this biological objective project in our basin plan. On the Tijuana River, I mentioned some of the things that we've done, but our priorities going forward will be to continue to oversee IBWC and insurance compliance with their cease and desist order, and also work with them on the expansion of the international treatment plant from 35 right now to 50 million gallons per day, and ensure that the nation-to-nation discussions and coordination across the nations at local, state, and federal levels are implemented effectively. We can do that in one of a couple of ways. One is through our regular meetings with IBWC and Veolia, EPA, and their staff, but also through Minute 320, which is still in place with the new commissioner. I am one of the core regulatory group members. And also this week on Friday, the California-Mexico Border Relations Council will be meeting here in this room to discuss interagency and international cooperation to address border pollution. We will be implementing our advanced restoration plans that you adopted through a memorandum of understanding with EPA and IBWC. We've discussed that with them several times and put it on pause while we worked on the cease and desist order. But now that that is in place and we're regulating, we'll come back to that. And I hope to be able to report back to you before the end of the calendar year that we've approved that. Coming this year, we have some heavy work to do in terms of healthy aquatic ecosystems. The regional stormwater permit is coming back. We will have an internal draft this December, and we will be having workshops next year. Concomitant with that is an update of the basin plan water quality objectives for bacterial indicators in the TMDL. I'm going to mention that in just a moment, but we've decided to put that first while the staff teams work on both projects simultaneously. Stormwater staff will be working on the update to the bacterial indicators, and they will be working on the stormwater permit so that we will be able to bring those two items to you in echelon, one right after the other. We will also be working on the agricultural waste discharge requirements. You've heard that there's a blue ribbon panel that met. They're hearing some of the concerns that we've raised for small farmers in the San Diego region not being treated the same way as pistachio farms along Highway 5 or 99 in the Central Valley. But we will be having workshops for the public before the board and plan to bring the agricultural WDRs update to you probably in early 2027. Channel maintenance evaluation. Our region was one of the first in the state to do a programmatic environmental certification for the city of San Diego. We are evaluating that program and determining what, if any, changes we want to make in the next generation of that permitting or other permitting decisions on terms of channel maintenance. There we try to manage the dilemma between ensuring there's adequate flood control capacity but also ensuring that those channels also support the beneficial uses where they are rivers and streams. And then finally, this is where Cynthia Gorham particularly comes in, the Santa Margarita River Nutrients Alternative Restoration Plan. One of the key ways it'll be implemented will be through the stormwater permit, but more importantly through agricultural WDRs. So that has gone through peer review, and we anticipate being able to bring that to you early next year. For the unimpaired consumption of fish and shellfish, we are implementing the strategic water quality assessment that you approved about 2 years ago. And we're about to prepare a remedial investigation feasibility study with the Navy. That is to say, they will be preparing one for the Coronado Navy base, IR Site 9, the Fiery Marsh. During the last year, we were able to work with them to have a biological survey conducted in San Diego Bay, which evaluated and determined that the discharge of pollutants in groundwater were not causing a significant impact to the benthos in San Diego Bay. This is why I always say start with the biology first. Although there are contaminants in the soils, they're not moving into the bay. And this study now allows the Navy to move forward on the RIFS, that we can work with them, DTSC, Fish and Wildlife, to ensure that we're protecting San Diego Bay, even as we focus the costs on the most effective type of cleanup methods. We are continuing our ongoing investigation of contaminated sediments in the bay. We have not yet fixed it yet, but we're using sediment quality objectives. And for our staff to ensure across programs that we're implementing them effectively, we're preparing a guidance for our permitting and regulatory activities. 401 certifications is one example. And then the Shelter Island Yacht Basin, on the training review work plan that you just approved in August, we will be reopening that TMDL. We've reached the point of diminishing returns in terms of trying to regulate the water column copper concentrations. The boat hull coatings approved by Department of Pesticide Regulations still result in excessive copper loadings there. So we're going to reopen that, not just to lower the levels, but to reevaluate how we determine compliance using biotic ligand models, water effects ratios, and the benthic condition of San Diego Bay rather than strictly water chemistry. I will note here that although we have great big ships all over the rest of the bay, we do not have copper issues anywhere else like we have in Shelter Island. It's largely a function of a lack of flow through, especially on the ebb tide. So long-term physical changes to the bay may ultimately be the solution there rather than more progressive copper regulation. With regard to unrestricted recreation, I've already tipped my hand to one of the key projects that you approved in the work plan for the training review, and that is the long overdue update of the basin plan for water quality objectives for bacterial indicators and an update to the TMDL for the 20 beaches and creeks, including Tecolote Creek. That is going to take a couple of years. And as I mentioned, our staff working on that will also be working on the stormwater permit, which is the principal permitting vehicle that we use to achieve that. And they will in turn be working on the TMDL to ensure that both work harmoniously by the time they are brought to you for your consideration. Of course, the Tijuana River water quality restoration plans remain among our top priorities for all the reasons that you know very well. But we'll be working on actually achieving those controls through source control in Mexico through Minute 320, and continuing to advocate for a river diversion and treatment system to convey the flows to a treatment plant at IBWC, treat them and discharge them offshore, even as they improve capacity and resilience and reliability in Tijuana. As I mentioned, the San Diego River Investigative Order gave us some important lessons about sanitary sewer overflows, exfiltration, and on-site waste treatment systems. So among the actions that we're contemplating and studying right now is an update to our sanitary sewer collection permit and looking at exfiltration, working both in stormwater and wastewater. So there will be some actions for you in the coming years on that. For sustainable local water supplies, I think one of the shining stars of our practical vision has been what we were able to do to achieve the California Water Strategy goals before there was even a California Water Strategy, I must say, in all modesty. We have been looking at working with purveyors to efficiently permit their projects. And so those include the approval of the 2 salt and nutrient management plans. Now it's time to implement them so that we can ensure the effective reuse of recycled wastewater while also protecting those groundwater supplies. We will resume our drought resilience outreach this coming year. We have let that lapse, but we are now, I think, facing back into drought again, and it's time to bring up that ever-present conversation. You will have the chance to approve the East County Advanced Water Purification Project in November. This would propose to provide about 33% of East County's water, that includes mine, very happily, and Chair Strawn's, with recycled wastewater from Padre Dam. So we're looking forward to that opportunity to regulate that. The City of San Diego, as you received a report earlier this year, is continuing their work on phase 1, which is an actual construction, and we will be working with them on phase 2 for the next cycle. And then finally, of course, we are always looking for opportunities to expand non-potable recycled water production and use. And so on the plus side, for the South Bay Water Reclamation Plant, for example, that shares the ocean outfall with IBWC, they were originally planned for 25 million gallons per day. They scaled that down to 15 million gallons per day. They're now operating at about 6.5 million gallons per day, largely because of water conservation and effective reuse. So we've diminished the value of that plant, even though it remains a very large and expensive plant, potentially. So the City of San Diego will be reevaluating how it invests in its infrastructure. South Bay Water Reclamation Plant will be around for a long time, but we want to see a really effective phase 2 for pure water and effective use of purple pipe water where that's appropriate. Wrapping it up, we have a number of projects, some of them you've already seen in terms of core regulatory and as well as projects that benefit multiple beneficial uses. I wanted to touch on the Racial Equity and Environmental Action Plan. We have drafted one. We have 5 principal goals. We are working with the State Board's Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs, OPETA. They've given us comments on that, and I anticipate bringing an action for you during the coming fiscal year in terms of endorsing and supporting that. We are also working, of course, on border control, the regional stormwater permit, ag WDRs, but you will also have staff working on this cycle's integrated report. That's a report to US EPA from California on Clean Water Act sections 303D, impaired waters, and 305B, status of waters. It's a very important report. We're going to invest about 2,000 hours of staff time in that because there are thousands and thousands upon thousands of lines of evidence, data that's been collected. And quantifying that, analyzing it, and identifying where we have impacts and how they should be addressed is a key part of the work of the water boards. We've noted that biological integrity scores need to also be represented on that integrated report in terms of impairments. So we have advocated for that state board, and we are gratified that US EPA concurred with us and overruled state board's decision on some listings and insisted that they be added for biological scores. Also, we will be preparing for you a long overdue consolidation of the 3 Navy permits for around San Diego Bay and ancillary facilities. You'll have a chance to consider that during the coming fiscal year. And hopefully by December, you'll have a chance to consider the Point Loma Ocean Outfall NPDES permit, and EPA will consider its 301H waiver for that permit as well. And then finally, for PFAS, we have both an internal staff team, ensuring again that multiple programs, surface water and groundwater, are working together on the same guidelines and expectations. And I have been reluctantly volunteered to participate as the executive sponsor of PFAS coordination with the state board and other regions. And with that, I would like to ask that you can have any questions. I have staff here prepared to assist me and recommend that you adopt with the errata the tentative resolution R9 2025-0129. And are there any questions from the board today?
I'll move that we adopt resolution 2000, I've lost my place here, 2025-0129. I'll second it.
Yes, Dr. Olson.
I think we skipped over seeing if there was any public comments or nothing, Zoom or otherwise. Okay.
We start with your questions first.
Yeah. Well, we're past that, I think, right now, but unless anybody. Go ahead.
I noticed that you said that there's going to be a sediment study done on Tijuana, and the raw sewage that's going out, the settable solids are probably quite significant. So do we address, I know that this probably happened after you were planning this, but is because we are doing sediment studies, although they sound like they're in different areas.
I included.
How does that interface with what we might do?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Olson. I included that under the broad category of border pollution control. We're requesting the funding right now from State Board. It may come in the form of Proposition 4 or perhaps cleanup and abatement account, but we don't yet have that funding. And depending on how much we can get, the project is scalable. But I anticipated that staffing need with that project in our operations plan. And our staff, Lane Chu in particular, has prepared the proposal. Scorp would be our contractor if we're able to get those funds. And they're very good at running the projects themselves. So the work will be important, the field work particularly, because yes, those solids settling in the river and the estuary are very much on my mind. And I'm curious to see what, if anything, happens to them during the coming rain years. But we want to do that quantification. So we will be making that proposal, and it's built into our operations plan.
Well, my concern is that there could be a lot of forever, to use a simple term, chemicals
Yes.
in there. And then we spend, more than decades trying to deal with it. So would they look at the more typical chemicals first, or will they look at these more that have a longer impact and can translocate into biological?
For sediment chemistry, the samples are collected synoptically. So there's sediment chemistry, toxicity, and benthic condition samples all collected at the same time, along with sediment grain characterization. And this suite of analytes is very large. And so it includes organics, inorganics, metals, and so on. The advantage of doing this is that there is funding, and we anticipate more funding to come from Prop 4, among others, for marsh restoration and climate change adaptation. So the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve is working on the second of many phases of TETRIP, the Tijuana Estuary Tidal Restoration Project. And so, as I indicated earlier, if in the early findings we see that there are areas that are more contaminated than others, we will do what we can under our permitting authority and polite encouragement to have them focus on those areas first to remove those contaminated sediments, rather than just sites that are better ecologically but don't necessarily remove contaminated sediments. I believe we'll find a happy concurrence where we have any contaminated sediments. Removing those will fit in with their marsh restoration plans as well.
So I'm sorry, but I didn't so when we look, do we look at these, like forever chemicals? So
Yes.
Okay, we do. So they're part of the regular analysis.
Yes, and we'll make sure that things like PFOS, PFOA are also included in that
And
analyte list.
PCBs,
And PCBs are absolutely on that list. And we've utilized sediment quality objectives, as I indicated, in San Diego Bay, where we have PCBs, tributyl tin, mercury, lead, everything else. So we're at the forefront, I believe, in the state in terms of actually using sediment quality objectives, and we'll continue that. We're going to apply that tool as well now to our worst environmental case right now, which is the Tijuana River Estuary, and the potential for industrial legacy pollutants that may have been deposited there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
My only comment is I did note how often the term biological objectives and measurements were included in this plan, and I'm pleased to hear that. Can you go ahead and call for the vote, please?
Ms. Cantu,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Ms. Chu,
Aye.
Ms. Warren,
Aye.
Chair Strawn.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to our last item, item number 8, at least last item for the public part of the meeting. Resolution to update and clarify delegation of powers and duties to the executive officer. That's tentative resolution R92025-0144. Kiara, would you lead us in?
Okay, and how's the sound? Great. Okay, good morning, Chairman Strawn, members of the board. My name is Kiara Clemente. I'm a senior environmental scientist here to present item 8, which is a tentative resolution to update and clarify the delegation of powers and duties to your executive officer. For today's presentation, I plan to provide a little history on the 2 existing delegation resolutions, explain the reason for these delegation resolutions, go through some numbers and show what has been delegated over time, recap what the tentative resolution today does or what it does differently, and review the process for if a board member wants to make sure that something is heard at a board meeting. All right, let's start with what can be delegated. Water Code Section 13223 Subdivision A authorizes the San Diego Water Board to delegate any of its powers and duties to the executive officer or EO from here on out, except for the following: the promulgation of any regulations, the issuance, modification, or revocation of any water quality control plan, water quality objectives, or waste discharge requirements, the issuance, modification, or revocation of any cease and desist order, the holding of any hearing on water control plans, and the application to the Attorney General for judicial enforcement, with a handful of exceptions, citing statute seemingly focused on emergency relief. The reason these can't be delegated, I presume, is that these are big decisions and usually not done under a time crunch. In large part, what that leaves to be delegated are formal enforcement actions, which is why I'm the one here doing the presentation. All right, so starting with the statute, in 2005, the San Diego Water Board adopted Resolution R9-2005-0271, which delegated to the executive officer all of the powers and duties that the board could delegate, with the understanding that this authority would be used at the executive officer's discretion. The purpose of the delegation was to provide flexibility for the water board as a whole, so that we could be more nimble and effective through timely actions. For example, cleanup and abatement orders are most effective when they can stop an existing or ongoing discharge while they're happening. In these cases, waiting for a board meeting can be to the detriment of the environment. Or administrative civil liability complaints, or ACLs from here on out. These are basically monetary penalties. They require a hearing within 90 days. Historically, agendizing those hearings sometimes presented challenges, and staff would sometimes have to delay or reissue the complaint in order to fit into the board's agenda constraints, like quorum issues or packed agendas. So if everything that can be delegated is already delegated, the real question becomes, how should the EO use their discretion, and which matters should the EO agendize for consideration? Or, put differently, what should be delegated? Okay, along those lines, in 2014, the board adopted Resolution R9-2014-0046, which channeled Chapter 1 of the Practical Vision to ensure that the water board staff, funding, authority, tools, and influence are put to the best possible use, and clarified which actions the executive officer should take under delegation. To be clear, this clarification was specific to ACL actions, probably because those are the ones with the most variability in terms of significance. For example, in some cases, like mandatory minimum penalties or MMPs, we are statutorily obligated to take action. But the environmental outcome of these actions may be of minimal significance. In these cases, in order to streamline efforts, the resolution clarified that the EO should take action by delegation. The specific penalty actions that the board clarified that the EO should take action on include holding evidentiary hearings for MMP complaints, holding evidentiary hearings for mandatory penalty complaints pursuant to Water Code Section 13399.33. In simple terms, these are for stormwater non-filers and non-reporters. Also, hold evidentiary hearings for ACL complaints to recover unpaid permit fees. This is a bit nuanced, but we generally added these in if warranted when we're doing ACLs for stormwater filers and stormwater non-reporters under B over there. The next one, approve or reject settlement orders up to $500,000, imposing ACLs under Water Code Section 13385, 13350, or 13308. And the last one is to hold evidentiary hearings for ACL complaints, imposing liability for non-discharge violations up to $500,000. As a general spoiler alert here, most of what has been done is under D, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, all right. Uh-oh. Oh, back. Okay. So that very same resolution in 2014 also clarified that regardless of the delegations granted, what certain penalty actions should not be delegated or taken by the EO. The board requested that the EO bring the following ACL matters to the board for action: matters of a unique or unusual nature, matters involving significant policy questions, highly controversial matters, or matters known or believed to be in substantial risk of litigation, and any matter that the San Diego Water Board member requests to be brought to the attention of the board. So that was 10 years ago. Let's have a look at the actions that have been taken over the last 10 years. All right. In the last 10 years, and to be very specific, I chose July 1st, 2015 to July 1st, 2025 to cut off any pending enforcement actions right now. In the last 10 years, the San Diego Water Board as a whole has completed 86 ACL actions or penalties. The executive officer took 71 of those 86 actions, or 83%. 53 of those 71 were expedited payment letters settling mandatory minimum penalties. These are generally uncontested settlements for either self-reported effluent violations or late reports. The dollar amounts are prescribed in the statute, and the board has minimal discretion to adjust the penalty. The average MMP was 18,000, and the biggest one was 156,000. Next, 17 EO actions were non-MMP settlements that were over 500,000. Again, these were undisputed by the dischargers or any third parties. Most of these were in stormwater and irrigated lands programs for failing to enroll in or submit reports. For these, the average penalty amount was 48,800, and the biggest one was 291,000. The last EO action was a hearing for an industrial stormwater facility called Modern Stairways for a $94,000 ACL. Violations included inadequate best management practices, missing annual reports, and unpaid fees. All were non-discharge violations. What was interesting about this process was that we had originally envisioned saving time by lining up a bunch of non-filers and non-reporters for the same EO hearing date. But in the end, the rest all settled out, and it really didn't save us any time having one hearing before the EO for this one case. Now, in contrast, the board considered 15 penalty actions, or 17%, which is what I will describe in greater detail in my next slide. So by the numbers, this would suggest that you're seeing the tip of the enforcement iceberg, but by dollar amount, the iceberg is actually upside down. Let's unpack that. All right. So the pie chart on the left shows that the EO acted on the majority of the 86 ACL actions, and we describe those actions and what they looked like. The pie chart on the right shows those same actions, still in blue, by dollar amount rather than number. So all of the 71 delegated ACLs in the last 10 years totaled $1.8 million, whereas the 15 ACLs issued by the board total $35 million. And that's about 95% of the total ACL amount. All this is just another way to say that the big stuff like recalcitrant construction site, repeat offenders, or massive sewage spills are what make it to your agenda. But what did those 15 board actions look like? 12 of those were uncontested settlement orders, which usually exceeded the $500,000 cap. The most recent and frequent examples of these are the settlement orders for significant sewer spills, like with the cities of San Diego and Oceanside. The other 3 ACL actions were contested hearings before the board. These would be the Vista Pacific and USA Portola cases for violations of construction stormwater requirements, and the Olivia Liu case for violations of the cannabis cleanup order. An interesting note is that even when some of these could have been delegated, like the Olivia Liu ACL, they were not due to the unique circumstances and likelihood of litigation. And in fact, all of these are still making their way through the Superior Court process. Now let's circle back to why these delegations exist. To make sure that the Water Board's staff, funding, authority, tools, and influence are put to the best possible use. As a process refresher, whether the board or the EO take the final action, many of the steps remain the same, especially from the public's perspective. For example, each tentative order is subject to the same web posting and public noticing process. We review and respond to comments the same either way. And for executive officer hearings, they're subject to the same administrative procedures. But the truth is that preparing for a board meeting does take staff time. Time to prepare the agenda materials, presentations, coordination with the dischargers, etc. On average, taking an ACL order to the board takes us an extra 80 hours of staff time collectively. So by delegating 53 MMPs, staff saved at least 4,240 hours of prep time, or 2.3 PYs. For the uninitiated, a PY is a personnel year, which is the equivalent of a full-time position working for a year. By delegating another 17 settlement orders, we saved an additional 1,360 hours, which is almost another PY. That's 3 PYs over the last 10 years that we were able to redirect to working on more important things like reviewing spill demographics and monitoring reports, conducting more compliance inspections and compliance investigations, and ultimately issuing more informal and formal enforcement as a result of these things. Simply put, without these delegations, we would not be able to keep up with the current compliance and enforcement demands. So the resolution before you today is drafted with this in mind. Tentative Resolution R9-2025-0144 strikes the delicate balance of streamlining our collective efforts commensurate to the significance of the enforcement and allows us to focus our resources on what's most important. It combines the two existing resolutions into one order. In so doing, it makes clear that the matters that should be brought to the board for all enforcements, not just for monetary penalties. That's the unique or unusual circumstances, significant policy questions, controversial. That's true for all of the board's directive. The resolution also removes the $500,000 cap on settlement orders. Again, there have been some ACLs like the Lake Hodges sanitary sewer spill or the Olivia Liu case that were less than 500,000, but were still agendized for board consideration because they triggered one of the above. And usually settlements over 500,000 tend to do that as well. But occasionally we do get a settlement over 500,000 that doesn't trigger the board's consideration. So there's a blurry area on where to draw that line. And for this reason, it would be simpler to just rely on the triggers themselves rather than a somewhat arbitrary $500,000 cap. And although we haven't utilized it much lately, the tentative order reserves the option for select evidentiary hearings before the executive officer. If we do start using this tool again, it should make it easier for us to schedule hearings. Now, recognizing that this places a lot of trust and discretion with your executive officer, let's talk about some of the safety checks. First, in cases where the EO is on the fence, I talked to the EO and he confirmed that he consults the board chair before deciding whether to take action or agendize it for board consideration. And next, let's recap the process for requesting that a matter be brought for board consideration. First of all board members should be subscribed to the email list for formal enforcement notices. When we initiate a public comment period for an enforcement order, we notice it through these emails. If you read these emails and something captures your eye and you want to make sure it gets on the board's agenda, this would be the time to notify your EO and/or advisory council. And finally, the directives of this tentative order include a review every 3 years or if ever there's a change in executive officer. With these measures, there should be sufficient opportunity to clarify the board's expectation. And therefore, staff recommend adoption of the tentative order. This wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
I think Ms. Tu is first.
Thank you for the presentation. Oh, the delegation of matter is so important to the work of this organization. And I noticed you did have board member can request agenda items. Is there a procedure for the contester? To actually
hearings.
Yeah.
So for example, there are certain hearings that the executive officer can schedule for EO hearings. And when you look at our hearing dates, there's usually 2 days per month. One would be one we reserve for the EO hearing, one for you guys. And the process for, I'm actually going to punt to Dave here, the process for you guys saying, oh, this looks like it's delegable, but I want to hear it. How would they do that?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, board member two. I'll hazard an answer and just ask staff to clarify. If the discharger wishes to present their case to the board, they absolutely can do that. My decision in that case would be trumped by their request to have the matter considered by the full board.
In one of the final slides that you showed the triggers, the likely to proceed to litigation trigger was removed. Is that intentional or are you just summarizing?
The current the proposed tentative order removes if a settlement is over 500,000, it must go to the board. And generally speaking, I think it's still going to go to the board because generally speaking, settlements over 500,000 tend to have significant nuances, possible litigation risk, et cetera. But this would allow the EO to have more discretion in case there is a settlement over 500,000 that's non-controversial and really not worthy of your time.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. I'm sorry if I asked it poorly. One of the triggers that you showed in the 2014 resolution was likely to proceed to litigation. And I just want to make sure that's still in this one.
Which one?
Likely to proceed to litigation.
Absolutely.
Okay, because it wasn't on the slide. That's why I was asking.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I firmly believe every 10 or 20 years, which has been our pattern, we need to revisit this. One of the questions, and the reason I brought this up to Dave, is what makes us a board? Why are we organized as a board that consciously brings a variety of people with all of our different perspectives to look at issues? And contrast that with the other institutions, state and federal for that matter, that are executive run, where you have one person making a ultimate decision and then there's no more appealable. That's basically it. I think the value of the water boards being specifically 9 boards throughout the state of California is incredibly important. We have to make really difficult decisions. And the only way we're allowed to do that, it's not through our authorizing legislation, I don't believe. I mean, there is that, of course, but it's because the public allows us to make these decisions. And the reason they allow us is they feel, I think, in most parts, that we do represent our communities and we are available to listen to them and respect them and pay attention to what their values are. If as we move away from that, we sacrifice our ability to implement water policy that would really be important to protect our environment and all of our beneficial uses. There's tremendous pressure, and there always have been. I know personally in my involvement, there's been 5 major campaigns to either do away with the water boards and turn it into an executive function, or to reduce the number of water boards from 9 to pick a number. I think all numbers have been chosen. And we've always been able to push that back. And I think that is incredibly important. And so when we choose to delegate, and this is absolutely no reflection on our executive officer, we are particularly graced. I have worked with many executive officers throughout California, and I only took this position because it was Dave Gibson as our executive officer. And so this is nothing but respect to him. But even if it's a public hearing, you lose a certain element of transparency when you move to the executive from the full board. And part of it is simply the cadence of us having a meeting the second Wednesday of the month. People who may not be tracking something say, oh, it's the second Wednesday of the month. You have been meeting on the second Wednesday of the month for decades. I know to look at to see if there's anything that I need to be interested in. So I think that is incredibly important. I think I like the new resolution. I think that's good, but I think it's really important that we are reminded why we are a board and not an executive function. So thank you for your presentation. I move the passage of resolution 2025 round 0144.
We have a motion and a second. Are you green because you want to say something?
Oh, no,
or
I
you're
was
just
waiting
ready
for
to
my
vote?
roll call.
Yeah, I appreciate this presentation and a chance to look at this. That, you know, it's probably just me, but 10 years is a long time to go back and look at this. And I'm sure the information is available. I'm sure it's also buried in all the things we look at every month. But I think it's important, in line with what Celeste was just talking about, that it's clear that on top of this delegation, that this board institutes a good review process, so that we look at this periodically and we know what has been approved, what these numbers, the charts you put up here, but more on a yearly basis rather than a every 10 years. Doesn't have to be a long time consuming thing at all, but I don't know, maybe just within the executive reports, couple little pie charts or something, just to show, so that we can clearly show that we are in fact practicing an oversight function. And that I think relieves some pressure from our executive officer, and also takes a step toward what Board Member Celeste was talking about.
I just wanted to say, I mean, when you see how many Dave has done, all of which require staff time, I think we're very, very lucky. And I greatly appreciate this, both on the part of the executive officer and also on the part of the staff. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I clarify something? I second a motion to approve this plan. I think the motion does not talk about how frequently that we should do the review of this. And in the staff recommendation. So when you mention once every 1 year, with all due respect, that's a very frequent.
I didn't mean to sound that way. I think the information is there. Okay. I'm saying I haven't looked at it every year or so like I should. So maybe we change how that's presented so it jumps out at us a little bit more, or some kind of a summary, but I wouldn't present that as any need to change what we're voting on today. It's just kind of a side comment that.
I'll amend my motion. I think we can go by that, and maybe every 5 years review the delegation.
Board Member Cantu, you're suggesting a change to the resolution, right? So you want the resolution to say every year, the executive officer report should give us an update on enforcement actions that were delegated, and then change the 3 years to 5 years? Okay. So, and then you wanted to change the resolution from 3 years to 5 years? Is that what you're,
Was it 3 years before? I was thinking it was more than that.
that's what the resolution says,
It's
yes.
every 3 years and or when we have a new executive officer.
Okay,
That's right.
so
So we'll stick with 3 years and then we'll present the delegated enforcement actions every year.
so we can call for a vote on the motion as amended.
Do we have a second?
I agree
Yeah,
with
she
this.
seconded.
At second, I agree with that.
Ms. Cantu,
I'm sorry, what?
You vote.
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Ms. Tu,
Aye.
Ms. Warren,
Aye.
Chair Strong,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay, with that, the public part of this meeting is completed and we will transition to a closed session and then return here briefly to adjourn this meeting. And the closed session will be looking at item number 9I as in India. Is that correct? Do I need to make any other statement? No.
Inside. Okay. Go ahead, sir. Just say anything.
Is the recording on now? Okay.
Yes, sir.
The meeting is hereby adjourned.